This gaming PC escaped my shop because our customer was concerned that his CPU might be failing, because although the system will turn on just fine, he noticed that the CPU diagnostic LED never turns off when it should. So what exactly is going on here? Well, typically there are only 3 reasons why you would ever see the CPU diagnostic LED on your motherboard turn on, with the first 2 having to do with something called post, or the power on self test that your motherboard runs on every single startup the second you press the power button to check the health and compatibility of all your internal hardware, like your CPU, GPU, RAM, and storage device, which actually happen to be the 4 labels in the top right of the motherboard, as that's what gets tested every single time. So generally, you'll see that CPU LED every single time you press the power button. However, it's supposed to cycle between all 4 of those LEDs, with it only staying on one if one of the components doesn't pass, which would have resulted in no display out, which can't be the case, obviously. Along with the fact that the only other reason you'll see that CPU LED on most motherboards ever turn on while Windows is running is if your PC's overheating, but at just 56 degrees Celsius, that's definitely not a problem, or at least not hot enough to turn this on. So then if this LED is not caused by any of those 3 reasons, what gives? Well, I've actually come across this exact issue before, and it actually has nothing to do with the CPU, despite the CPU LED being turned on. See, the giveaway for this was the fact that none of the RGB is working despite being plugged in. You're wondering, what does RGB have to do with any of that? Well, there's actually a known bug on some Gigabyte motherboards that I ended up coming across a while back, where I learned where the RGB controller on B650 and 850 motherboards from Gigabyte have this weird bug where instead of sending an RGB signal to the LEDs on the fans, it ends up just turning on the CPU LED all the time like this, caused by a corrupt RGB firmware update that Gigabyte rolled out on their website and has since removed, that basically bricked so many RGB controllers. So when it comes to fixing this issue, it can either be super easy or an absolute nightmare, depending on how bricked your RGB controller is, because Gigabyte's patch or fix for this particular issue is to download the latest RGB lighting firmware controller from your motherboard's website, which has worked for me in the past by running the firmware updater tool built in. But for this one, it freezes every single time because it can't even recognize the existing firmware for this motherboard. It's what causes it to go to this not responding state, with even updating the motherboard's BIOS to the latest version making no difference at all if you were curious, with no RGB in that same CPU LED. So according to Gigabyte, the only way to fix this when it still doesn't work after trying to use the firmware updater tool is to actually file a warranty claim for an RMA or return merchandise